Paragon's Marcolian Guide. This video is going to walk through everything you need to know to understand the Marcolian class and parallel to understand the different Paragons, as well as the overall play style of Marco, the key cards, the builds, the win conditions, the counterplay, everything you need to know to be good at Marco as a beginner if you're getting into this game. So, what is Marcolian? Well, Marcolian, the Mars class, the people who live on Mars in the parallel lore, is a parallel that absolutely defines the strength of the game's meta overall. Some of the consistently strongest top-performing cards and paragons are in the Marcolian class, offering aggressive, board-centric gameplay combined with some of the game's strongest burn spells and powerful removals. Marco is an absolute force to be reckoned with in the parallel meta, on the ranked ladder, and in tournaments. If you've played parallel recently, of course, you've seen Marco over the last 6 months. I'm recording this January 2025. Over the last 6 months, there's been multiple Cathy metas where Cathy is the strongest deck in the game, especially at one point during Planetfall with a deck called Unit Cathy, before Rallying Cry got nerfed, and then also after Aftermath came out with a card called Combat Heuristics Extrapolator, which turned Cathy into a tier 0 S+ tier, just insane deck. So you've seen some Cathy if you've been playing a little bit, but she's far from the only strong Paragon in Marcolian. Lemmy's good, and even Armored Division, the one I have on the screen right now, is pretty good. So the fact that Lemmy is even stronger, or I'm sorry, Cathy is even stronger sometimes, just goes to show how strong Marco as a whole is. And while Cathy is the most common, Lemieux, aka Lemmy, is an off-meta favorite for many players all up and down the ladder, and even ADHQ has some pretty good potential as well. So let's review the Paragons for Marco a little closer. Let's actually start with Cathy.
Greetings from Mars.
So Cathy, as I said, striking fear into the heart of parallel players around the world, especially after some of the recent builds were so strong before they got nerfed. Cathy's passive effect just makes her incredibly strong. So the passive, the second unit you play each turn gains +1/+1. Now, this might not sound like much if you're just getting into the game, but Parallel's units tend to have conservative stat lines. The stats aren't super high. Most of the 1-drops have 2 or maybe just 1 for each stat. You're usually going to get like a 3/3 for 3, maybe a 2/3 for 2, a 4/4, a 4/5 for 4. You're not getting giant stats. And so especially on cheap units, if you're going to play a lot of cheap units, kind of like Zoo style, then Cathy's passive is ridiculously strong. It's just really hard to overestimate how much of an impact that extra +1/+1 can make on your units, especially in the early game. And then the active, when you play Cathy, she is a 5/5 unit for 4, and her text says, this unit can't attack on your turn. After you end your turn, this unit attacks a random enemy. So Cathy attacks a random target, and as a 5/5 unit for 4 energy, that's a lot of power to be attacking immediately the same turn you play her, right on turn 4 potentially, although of course it is random, so you don't know who she'll hit, and that does introduce some RNG. But if the board is empty, she'll just hit the opponent's face every time, which is an amazing aggressive tempo play. So Cathy, very, very strong. Simple, and yet so strong.
Yeah.
Lemmy, a little more going on here. His passive is very simple. All he does is at the start of the game, you get an extra 1/1 unit on the board. A 1/1 token. And I believe if you're going first on the play, that token cannot attack. And I think if you're going second, so on the draw, I think the token actually can attack on turn 1. Don't quote me on that if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the case. It can attack if you go first. It can attack right away if you go second. So you have a tiny little tempo advantage. And then he is a 3/4 evasive for 5 mana, and his muster gives you 3 abilities. You choose one unless you're assaulted, which means you've hit them in the face that turn. In that case, you do all 3. And the 3 choices are to destroy target damaged unit, put a unit from your waist into your hand, and to give all friendly units +1 attack this turn only. So the way Lemmy tends to play, especially with his special Lemmy-only card, Lemmy's Irregulars, which we'll look at later, basically he's got a lot of ways to do unit destruction. So destroy target damaged unit is something you can do a lot with Lemmy. And so he's able to handle tall boards and like big defenders and stuff like Earthen Terramechs, or any big Earthen defenders, or even just Augencore defender tokens, or maybe Augencore Sestmere unit. All kinds of units, anything big, Lemmy is really good at getting through those. And what Lemmy likes to do is to go wide to get through the big units by cheating them away with targeted destruction. Maybe a Master Poisoner. I'm actually not sure if Lemmy likes to run Master Poisoner, but you probably could squeeze one in pretty easily in some metas. And generally just Lemmy's Irregulars plus Lemmy's effect. Just use that hard removal, and then you get wide. And he also tends to use a relic called Tactical Display, which we'll look at later, which basically means as you play more units, you do some extra damage to the opponent's face. So Lemmy is a bit complicated, but if you can figure him out, his play style is really fun. And he's you know, some players really like this, even at the highest level. Like one of the top players in the game, Hogvax, he was grinding Lemmy last month when no one was grinding Lemmy, and he hit Master pretty quickly. So it's don't underestimate Lemmy. Now, the Paragon that's the most uncommonly played, Armored Division HQ. There was one big moment for this Paragon so far in Parallel's sort of history as an esport, which is when Quinto, Paragon's OG, y'all know him and love him if you're watching this video, he took an Armored Division deck to the top 8 in a big tournament, which got everybody talking, you know, made some money, had a good performance, and he did it with a deck that no one had really seen before using Armored Division. There's even a funny story where during that tournament, Quinto was playing against another high-end tournament player, famous for running off-meta decks, in fact, a player named Perp. And Perp literally banned this deck because he looked at it and he was like, Quinto, I don't know what the hell this deck does. I'm just going to ban it. I don't understand it. I don't like it. I'm banning it. So we've seen it work occasionally. With that said, it's less consistent than Kathy and Lemmy and tends to get played a lot less. So what does it do? So the passive is that at the end of your turn, all of your friendly vehicles, which is specific type of units, in case you're super new to the game, some units have a vehicle tag. So some units are vehicles, but not all units. So all of your friendly vehicles gain one of the following buffs at random at the end of your turn. So you either get +1 attack on all your vehicles, +1 health on all your vehicles, shielded, evasive, or armed. And it's a random buff at the end of each turn to all your vehicles. And this is the thing, is that these buffs can add up pretty quickly, but because it's random, it's hard to plan around it. It's hard to know, okay, I'm going to set this up and then I'm going to get extra health and that's going to give me the value trade. Or I'm going to put this unit down and then it's going to get shielded so the Shroud can't banish it. Or, you know, it's hard to plan because it's just, you don't know until it happens and your opponent gets to play their turn right after the buff. So you don't really get to do anything until the start of your next turn. It's hard to play around. Which is kind of the trick, especially when Kathy and Lemmy are so strong in what they do. Kathy's +1/+1 buff for the second unit each turn is just so consistent. On top of that, Armored Division's unit is a 1/4 for 3, shielded, can't attack, and it says friendly vehicles have battle ready. So that's only when the unit's on the board. It's a little confusing. You have to play the unit, and then whenever it's on the board, it gives your friendly vehicles battle ready, and then the first time a friendly vehicle deals damage to a player each turn, draw a card. So these effects are incredibly strong, but they're only active as active abilities when the Armored Division unit is on the board. You get one of those per game. You play your Paragon. And so the question for ADHQ is how to make this inconsistent buff effect work consistently, and then how to best take advantage of these super strong active abilities, which are very strong, but it's a 3-mana unit, and then you need to play other stuff with it, or you need to have stuff on the board already. So how do you really take advantage of this in a timely manner? How do you make the passive work consistently when it's inconsistent by nature? And just like, what is the build that really unlocks all of this? And how do you build it in a way where Kathy doesn't end up doing the same thing better just because the passive buff is so strong, right? These are the kinds of questions we're asking ourselves when we think about Armored Division. With all that said, let's take a look at some key cards that you're going to see over and over when you're playing Marco. Give me a full screen real quick here. I'm going to actually close out of the game temporarily. Otherwise, it will make a bunch of sound effects in the background, and we don't need that going on. All right, so I'm on Paralink over here, and let's look at some of the cards that are super essential for Marcolian, starting with maybe the most evil card, and it's been nerfed recently, but it's still super strong, Marcolian Bannerman. So Bannerman, it's a 1 energy, 1 attack, 2 health, and it says, after you play an effect for the first time each turn, this unit gains +1/+1. Now, this unit used to not be limited. It used to buff +1/+1 every time you play an effect, and it was so ridiculously OP. It's actually crazy to think that that was ever the case. It only recently got changed, and it's still one of the strongest 1-drops in the game. So I'm actually really happy it's been nerfed. But with that said, you play this, and then you just start playing effects, and every turn it gets a nice buff. And if the opponent can't remove this quickly, the stats can just ramp out of control so fast, especially if you play it with a 0-cost spell. So you play Bannerman and then you play No Snitching, or you play Bannerman on your second or third turn, if you're, depending on if you're first or second, and you play Take It or Leave It, the 0-cost ramp energy spell, right? Those work as well. So you can buff it for free, basically. It costs you a card, but it costs you no energy. It's this card, you got to put 3 of them in all of your Marcolian decks. That's it. Bottom line. I almost swore. Bottom effing line. I almost just swore. I held back. I'm being good for the Paragons videos. Yeah, enough said. Bannerman is ridiculous. Next up, a card that has just started seeing play after the last balance patch, Vindicator Rapid Assault Vehicle. It's a 3 energy, 4 attack, 3 health unit, and it's a vehicle. And on attack, conceal a friendly bank card. That is occasionally interesting, but we're not going to worry about that. The real thing is this, Aftermath. When it dies, deal 3 damage to any target. So it's a 4/3 for 3, which is a good aggressive stat line. And then when it dies, it deals 3 damage to any target, which means this is almost guaranteed to at least get a 1-for-1 value where it trades with another unit, even if it gets killed right away. You play this, your opponent uses a Determined Assault to clear it, and then the Aftermath kills one of their units. It's basically a 2-for-1, because you're destroying a unit and they're using an effect, and you're only losing 1 card. So this is really good for 2-for-1 trades, and then if you play this right after you play a Machinist, which we'll look at right after this, the Machinist buffs vehicles, then this is a 4/4 because it gets +1 health. If you do it with Kathy, with the passive +1/+1 buff on the second unit played, it becomes a 4/4, then it becomes a 5/5, so it's a 5/5 for 3, and the Aftermath. So this card can get out of control really quickly. It's great for that turn 4 tempo spike, maybe turn 3 if you run it with a Take It or Leave It, aka the coin. This card has become the vehicle for Marco after the other vehicle, Combat Heuristics Extrapolator, got nerfed. So you're going to see a lot of that, and it's very strong, although you'll have to learn how to find the right tempo, like how to play it, when to play it. Okay. Crimson Fleet Machinist, 1 energy, 1 attack, 2 health. Muster is to draw a random vehicle. And don't underestimate this. Drawing a card at all from your deck for 1 energy and getting a unit, like that's already really strong. Because running out of cards is Marco's biggest problem, and this is how you avoid letting that happen, basically. Like in theory, so unprofessional. burping during a video. I apologize. In theory, Marco's supposed to run out of cards as it tries to be super aggressive. But Machinist, and running out of cards is like the downside to Marco. But Machinist helps you like just not have that happen, so you can be super aggressive while refilling your hand. It's almost like the equivalent of how Cathari uses Triumph of Europa to refill their board. Like, this just lets you refill your hand in a really, really high tempo way with good value. And then on top of that, when a friendly vehicle enters the field, it gains 1 health. And this is surprisingly relevant, especially there's a lot of games where you get 2 Machinists on the board, and you have 2 of these, and then you play a unit like a Glaive or a Vindicator, an armored support vehicle, and a Lancer tank. There's so many good vehicles. The Victory, and it gets +2 health, and then maybe you get a Cathy buff, +1/+1 on top of that if you set it up right. Those buffs add up quickly. Like I said at the start of the video, units in Parallel are conservatively statted. They have low stat lines. You don't see a bunch of big stat lines at low costs unless you're playing Earthen. Earthen is the one class that gets some really big stat lines. That's like their advantage. So for a class like Marco to get these +1 buffs and then stacking 1 buff on top of the other, trust me, it's incredibly strong, and that's why Marco is consistently one of the best classes in the game, always determining kind of like what other decks can get played. Can you answer Marco? If you can't, the deck's going to struggle. Those stat buffs are a big part of it. And also a part of it are these high-quality burn spells. So Determined Assault, deal 3 damage to yourself and any target. So the damage to yourself is a downside, and I'm guessing that as the game evolves and more burn spells, more removal spells come out, eventually one day this is going to get power creeped. I'm actually curious how long it takes. 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. One day there's going to be a stronger 2-mana burn spell, I feel like. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's crazy. But as it is, like, burn is a little bit hard to come by, and just 3 damage for 2, even if you have to damage yourself, it's just so useful. You can use it to finish games if they're almost dead, which is the most obvious thing. If they have 3 health, you target them in the face, now you win. But it's also just really versatile board management tool for the early to mid game. Sometimes on turn 2, you just use Determined Assault, kill their 2-drop, and you stop a Void Trapper, stop a Standard Bearer, stop any 3 health unit, basically, that would otherwise be really starting to build value. Or in the mid game, turn 4, turn 5, you play like a cheap unit. Maybe you play 2 1-drops plus DA, and you build your board while also removing their best unit. It's just a really 3 damage for 2, surprisingly useful, even if you have to damage yourself in the process. So pretty much every Marco deck I've seen is running 3 Determined Assault. I'm not sure if I have any examples of like high-performing decks that leave that out. It's pretty much always included. Oops. Trying to build a deck for fun, apparently. It's not what I'm trying to do. Can I just make that go away, please? Hold on. All right. Fleet. No, I did it again. Clicking on the wrong spot. Okay, Fleet Support. Let me sip my tea. Fleet Support. 4 Energy Relic. This is not common right now, but it's going to happen again. Whenever there's a burn deck with Marco, this card starts getting played. So you want to know about it. And it's quite simple. It's a 4 Energy Relic. 4 Energy Relic. Yo, what's up, Mark? Welcome in, by the way. Yo, you guys all jumped in the chat when I looked away for 5 minutes. Skeeter, Gas, Mark, welcome in. Mark, after I'm done recording this video, ask me about the gear stuff, and I'm happy to tell you. Let me just finish recording this. I'm trying to do this with no edits. Welcome in, guys. Sorry, y'all snuck in when I wasn't looking. I got my like script up on the second monitor. 3rd monitor win. But yeah, 4 Energy Relic, and here's what it says. The first time you play an effect each turn, play a copy of it. So the first time you play an effect each turn, you cast a second copy. And that's really nice if you use it with a burn spell, right? So if you use that with... okay, I thought it might take me back, but it didn't. If you use that with the Determined Assault, you get 2 casts. Let's say the opponent has 6 health. You have a Fleet Support on the board. 1 Determined Assault can finish them off, right? You can use this with Kathy's Rallying Cry, which we're going to look at a little bit later in a few cards, to cast 4 units off of one spell. You can play it with, what's another good example? I mean, really the burn spells for sure. Crack Shot, 6 damage off of a 1 mana spell. Use it with a PS8 for a double removal spell. This is really, it's hard to find time. You have to play it for 4 energy, and it has to not get removed. So those are the conditions that kind of counterbalance it. But if it stays on the board, this is a huge win condition for burn decks. And if this card gets value for more than like 1 turn, it will start to flip the match. So effect-based Marco decks, especially Burn Kathy, we've seen them play fleet support a lot. It's definitely a card you want to be aware of. You just came in, Mark? No, you're good. Thank you for being here. If anyone's watching this video on YouTube, jump in on Twitch. We do streams on the paragonsdao channel, as well as on my personal channel, qFlux 888, qFlux 888. So make sure to keep an eye on the Twitch. We're always playing games at high ranks, farming Prime, showing off the newest strategies. I do my daily Prime grind 4 to 6 days a week on stream. Shoutouts Paragon, shoutouts Echelon, so don't miss it. Next up on the card review, Orbital Strike. Speaking of burn, this is the ultimate card to combo with fleet support. Deal 5 damage to any target for 4. If you ever played Hearthstone, this is Fireball, right? 4 damage for 5, kind of a classic, you know, some things never change across card games. Not that much to say about this. It's your classic burn spell. It's just, you're going to run this in some Marco decks. Not all, but any deck that wants to use burn as at least part of the strategy, you know, direct damage spells to the opponent's face. I mean, this is as good as they get. So Orbital Strike, it hasn't been in the meta as much lately, but it's a strong card, and you could run this in any Marco deck. It's an A tier card. It kind of fits into anything. It's just a matter of, like, is it super optimal for the current meta? Is it the right fit? But it's always playable. All right, guys, we're getting there. A few more. I feel like the card review is maybe the best part of these videos, because if you're a new player, just familiarizing yourself with cards is always the big task. But let me know in the comments if you think I'm reviewing too much or not enough, or any other cards you want to see. I'll try to stop doing calls to action now. Triumph of Mars. Marcolian Triumph card. This is actually a really powerful card. So 5 energy. Put all cards in your hand on the bottom of your deck in a random order, and then draw 3 cards. Reduce the cost of each card drawn by 3. So you cast Triumph, you draw 3 cards that are all discounted by 3, and ideally you do this when your hand is empty. So the idea usually is you play a bunch of stuff, you tempo out a bunch of units, you use your effects to control the board, and then right when you're about to run out of cards, you play Triumph, get 3 more cards, and they're all discounted, and you have that 1 additional push of value along with the tempo bonus from the cost discounts, and it just lets you keep up your momentum and just avoid running out of gas. That's basically what this is doing. It also has some pretty sick synergy with the Burn Kathy deck. Old school Burn Kathy. I'm not going to describe it right now, but this was a crazy one with a card called Spotter, Artillery Spotter. It was nutty, but those days are over, so I won't waste time in this video. Very strong. Not as essential as it used to be, but you'll probably run at least 1 or 2 of these in most high-end Marco lists. It used to be like you ran 3 in everything. Those days have kind of passed, but you still see Triumph of Mars pretty often. Very strong, and it could always come back into the meta, depending on you know, what decks are popular. And with future sets, we could see it come back. Okay, Artillery Volley, one of Marco's 2 big board clears. What is this? It's 3 energy. Destroy. I just pulled a Muka. That's what Muka always does. Muka always asks himself a question. Okay, so how does this work? I just did that. I said, what is this? Muka's rubbing off on me. His coaching. All right. In case anyone's watching this doesn't know, Muka is one of the top coaches in the game, and I study with him, thankfully. So, anyway, what is this? It's a 3 energy spell. Destroy target friendly unit. Deal damage equal to that unit's attack to all enemy units. So you sacrifice one of your units to destroy, hopefully, all of the enemy's units. There is a lot of theory and tech around how to play this card, when to play it, you know, when to bank it, when to hold it, how to set it up. It's a little bit beyond the scope of the beginner video, but just understand that this card is included in every Marco deck, with almost no exceptions. And it is a key part of Marco's toolkit, so when the opponent does get ahead early, you can come back. And furthermore, it's only 3 energy, so in the mid-game, in a perfect scenario, you have a contested board. You have units, they have units. You volley, sacrifice one of yours to destroy all of theirs, and even after that, maybe you can play another unit, and you can get that big tempo swing, which Parallel is all about tempo swings and tempo spikes. Our other board clear is Sendrillin. So this is a split card, just to make my life as difficult as possible for the beginner video. So it's got, you can cast this as one of 2 different things. If you cast it as a unit, it is a 4/4 for 5 with battle ready, and on attack, it deals 2 damage to another random enemy and friendly target. So 4 damage, battle ready, attacks right away. And then it damages, it damages 2 damage to a random enemy thing and 2 damage to a random friendly thing, but never itself. This you use sometimes, and it's nice. It's good aggression if you're close to winning and you just need to keep pushing aggro. But there's a lot to think about with the unit side. This game, these cards go so deep, sometimes it's hard to simplify, but we will simplify. We will focus on the effect side. So the main way you use this card, it's nice that it has this unit option. So it's not like dead in your hand if you're ahead on the board. But the main thing that really gives it value is the effect, burying the lead. But here it is. Deal 3 damage to each unit and player. The end. Mic drop. Awkward silence. That's it. 3 damage to everything on the board, including the opponent's face, including your face. So it's a symmetrical board clear. This reminds me of the kind of stuff you see in Gods Unchained, for example. There's a lot more of these like symmetrical board clears. Parallel has a little more of like one-sided board clears. But Cindy is just really good if the opponent gets way ahead on board. She can clear that board. And so if your opponent does get the tempo advantage and you don't have volley, this is your other answer. You want them to overextend, and then you cast the effect side, wipe their board. It's also nice as a burn spell because while it is expensive, if you get them down to 3 health, this will just finish them off. It'll kill them immediately. So it's nice that if you get close but not quite there, Cindy can finish off the opponent's health entirely. And that is very relevant, as well as the unit battle ready being able to hit face. So it's got that good finishing potential, and it's got that good comeback potential. That's what makes Sendrillin, aka Cindy, just so strong, is how it works if you're ahead and it works if you're behind. So it's a very, very versatile card. Okay, almost there. The last 2 cards I want to look at before we go into the sample deck lists is the Paragon-specific cards for Kathy and for Lemmy. Catherine's Rallying Cry has been nerfed multiple times, and it is still really strong. Although I'm happy to say it's actually pretty affordable. It's like $20 a card, which for how strong it is actually a pretty damn good price. But this card can only be in your deck if you're playing Kathy. And it's pretty simple. It just plays 2 random units, each with cost 2 or less from your deck. So 3 energy, cast 2 random units that cost 2 or less. And because you're Kathy, the second unit, assuming those are the first 2 units you play, the second unit gets the +1/+1 buff, which really adds a lot of value to this card. Ko Japan, thank you very much for the raid, man. I appreciate that. We're just recording a Marco beginner guide. So yeah, basically just plays 2 random units from your deck, and even though they're cheap, Rallying Cry tends to be a really useful card, getting you 2 units quickly, which is decent on the tempo side, potentially getting up to 4 energy worth of units for 3 energy spent. And then on top of that, the value of getting 2 units for 1 card and thinning out the deck, getting your early game units out of the deck so that as the game goes on, you're more likely to draw into your later game cards. For all these reasons, Rallying Cry is quite strong, and that's not even considering occasional synergies with stuff like fleet support. So this card used to be broken. Now it's just very strong. You definitely want to play that ×3 in all Cathy decks. And then what Lemmy gets for his special card, you can only play this if you play Lemmy, is Lemieux's Irregulars. It's a 3/3 for 3, and it has 2 powerful effects. First off, the Assault. So if the enemy has been damaged this turn, when you play this card, you may destroy target enemy unit damaged this turn. So if a unit was damaged this turn but not killed, then you play Irregulars, you can destroy that unit. It has to be assaulted, so it is a lot of setup. But basically, if you have a wide board with like a few 1/1 tokens or something, Irregulars can really be good removal. And then the thing that makes this card just go crazy is the second effect. After this unit deals combat damage to the enemy, draw a Lemieux's Irregulars. So you draw another copy from your deck, as long as it's in the deck. If there's none left in the deck, you won't draw. But if you have more of these in the deck, whenever this hits the opponent's face, you draw another one. And that can be really helpful to get you some card advantage. And if you're able to cast multiple of these and actually get the destruction effect, that value swing is massive, and you can really like destroy your opponent's strongest units while building up your hand, while building up your board. You can really build that momentum to a place where if they don't have a board clear, it can be impossible for them to come back. So this card, it's a little bit tricky, definitely a high skill cap kind of thing to set this up, to play with it properly, to build up to it, to know how to use it and when do you just bank it. Not an easy card, but a very powerful one. And this is really, I think, what gives Lemmy his ability to overperform when people don't expect it. Especially if it's an Earthen meta with a lot of big Earthen units. This is so nice. Like, Lemmy can be really nice against Earthen, is my understanding. One more card that I forgot to show you guys we should probably look at is the Victory. This is Marcolian's big late game vehicle card. The vehicle is irrelevant, but just it's big late game. It's the most expensive unit you run in most Marco decks, is what I'm trying to say. It's a 6 mana 4/5. It's shielded and it's evasive. And if you have Assault active, if you've hit him in the face already, then this deals 4 damage to any target when you play it. And then on top of that, the first time each turn an enemy unit enters the field, deal 2 damage to that unit and the enemy player. So this is evasive and shielded, so it's hard to deal with. It can get around Defender. The Assault lets it get an immediate tempo spike if it can like clear a unit as you play it, or maybe it just hits face for burn damage. And then whenever your opponent tries to do anything, they're taking extra damage to their board and their face, at least the first time each turn, as they try to play units. So the Victory can really help you get the opponent in checkmate. It can ramp up your burn at the same time as it helps you to establish board control. This is a very powerful card, and it's a big win condition card to help kind of slam the book closed and just finish the match when you're playing with Marco. What's up, MF fan? Welcome in, man. Welcome in. Okay, let's now review some sample deck lists. We'll keep this pretty quick. So here's an example of a Cathy list. This is actually something I copied off of a deck tracker, so it's actually being played at high ranks. And as most Cathy decks want to do it basically wants to be aggressive in the early game, build up a board quickly, and then just like front load the damage, hit him in the face early and often, and just dominate the board. So in the early game, we've got our Gunslingers, our Bannermen we talked about, our Machinists we talked about, Trigger Happy Trooper, and Pathfinder. So we are running it looks like 13 1-drops. And this is Kathy's signature deck building thing, is running way too many 1-drops. 13 1-drops, that's so many. That's not even counting the PS8 launchers. So tons of tempo, as well as some effective tempo removal, and even 1 coin for ramping, if we go second especially. We're running 3 of those rallying cries, so just so many units. We want to basically play 2 units every single turn. Play a 1-drop on turn 1, 1+1 on turn 2, 2+1, or rallying cry on turn 3, and then like machinist into a vindicator on turn 4. We're just trying to play 2 units every turn basically, and as soon as we get wide, we buff it up with fire support base. This is a card that I could have probably talked about. And has my camera been in a bad position for part of this? I'm sorry if my camera was covering stuff, but I forgot to double check the camera when I switched to this part of the thing. But anyway, rallying cry. You can see we just have so many ways. And then yeah, once the board is wide, fire support base, 4 energy, 2/5 defender, can't attack. Other friendly units have +1/+1 while this is on the board. So fire support base can buff all the rest of your units, and you're just stacking buffs, right? Machinist buffs your vehicles. Kathy's passive buffs everything if you play it second. Fire support base buffs stuff. And then Saboteur to remove opposing relics for the pesky Cathari decks, as well as maybe against some Earthen or other Marco decks. Maybe against Shroud, you use this on a stabilized shard. Send drill in for the board clear, volley for the board clear. And since we are going so wide so often, we're also running Memento. If you don't know what this does, don't worry about it, but very, very good with wide boards. So that's an example of a Kathy list. Next up, Lemmy. So Lemmy is going to look pretty different. And by the way, I didn't see any examples from this week of high-performing Lemmy decks, so this is a little more scuffed. This is like correct-ish, but you'd probably need to make a few adjustments for this to work at high ranks. This is something I was playing around with at the start of Aftermath. But big things to notice here. We're running the 3 gunslingers, which help us activate Lemmy's assault and all of our assault effects rather. We are running 3 longbow personnel carrier. This is really good, but Lemmy. It's a 0/4 defender, and if we're assaulted, we create 2 1/1 tokens, so a pretty big stat bomb for 3. We run all 3 copies of Lemmy's Irregulars. As we discussed, this card is super good. We're running 1 copy of Solar Grenade. You could run more, or you could run none, but when you bank it, it deals 1 damage to a random target. Really just anything we can do to increase our chance of getting Assault activated when we need it. We're also running this card, Guerrilla Tactics, deal 1 damage to target unit and its controller. So lots of ways to basically try to contest the board in the early game while having stuff to activate our assaults, to ultimately get to our Irregulars value, our LPC value. And then another big thing is Tactical Display. So with Lemmy, we want to find a chance to play Tactical Display. It's a 3-mana relic. After a friendly unit enters the field, deal 1 damage to the enemy and heal yourself for 1. So if you can play 1 or 2 of these, maybe with Logistics Mastery, maybe without it, this might be too greedy, but with Tactical Display, then when you use stuff like Longbow Personnel Carrier, or just playing a bunch of 1-drops and stuff and just keeping the board active, like, you're gonna chip away at their health pretty quickly. If you get 2 tacticals down, you're doing 2 damage to their face every time you play a unit. And if you're able to hit them in the face with your units at all, you can really start chipping away. One other thing we do see in Lemmy is Scimitar Captain, Guerrilla Warfare. Basically, this lets you discard a card from the opponent's hand. Sometimes this can be nice to discard like a Terramech from an Earthen hand, or get a Dominion out of Neve's hand, or a Demolecularize out of a Brand or a New Dawn Shroud type of deck. So, and of course, we still have the board clears. So you can see it's a very different flavor of deck compared to Kathy. Still going wide, but more focused on the removal from Lemmy's Irregulars, Lemmy himself, and also more focused on this Tactical Display, Longbow Personnel Carrier, kind of like chipping away at their face sort of stuff. And by the way, this also activates our assault effects when it does damage to the enemy's face. So just a lot a lot of ways to get Assault. And then lastly, Armored Division HQ. Let's bring this over. So this is actually getting played at high ranks. I saw this on a deck tracking site. Pretty interesting. So we're running way more. We have the 3 machinists still, and then we're just running all of the vehicle synergy. So Red Sand Scout is actually pretty unusual, but it has something that says if you charge when it attacks, then the next vehicle you play this turn gains 1 attack. So this can give your vehicle some extra attack. And interestingly, this list is only running 6 1-drop units plus the PS8s. So way less 1-drops in this ADHQ list. Way less early game. And instead, we've got the support vehicle, the wall breaker siege craft. This one is interesting. It's a 4-1 armed for 2. And so I believe the goal is to use machinist to buff the health, make it at least a 4-2, maybe even a 4-3. In a perfect world, you can even use the support vehicle. We're getting into the details a little bit, kind of going quickly, but use this to put shielded on this, and then also give it extra health. Then it doesn't die to Gunslinger, it doesn't die to PS8. If they can't answer this, this can get really strong, really fast as a 4-attack armed unit. And then they still have longbow, but they're not running tactical displays, so just really going for the vehicles. And they even have Nora, Hand of Unity, which lets you make all of your units for the rest of the game be vehicles. They've got Vindicator, and then they're using Researcher for draw, Grizzled Scout for attack ramp. And as you can see, they have less 1-drops, but it's still the same kind of idea. Spamming a ton of units in the early game, contesting the board early, and then ultimately getting wide. You want to outvalue them, get the draw from Researcher, and then ultimately you go wide with a wide board plus fire support base plus Grizzled Scout, maybe a Lancer tank to help you finish them off with the Assault, deal 4 damage to the enemy. A different way to do the same thing of contest the board early, get wide as soon as possible, buff your units, stack buffs, and then burn them down. Same kind of idea, but much more focused on vehicles. And frankly, probably a little bit less consistent, but people won't really know what you're doing, so there is a little bit of surprise factor in case that might help. And perhaps most notable here is the 3 FSBs plus the 2 Grizzled Scouts. That's a lot of cards dedicated to making sure we have that 4-mana buff, card available. The Grizzled Scout versus Fire Support Base debate rages on, but this player has chosen to just run both. And then I think most interesting here is they're not running Artillery Volley. I'm guessing that they just don't have it. It's a budget deck and they don't have it. Because I'm imagining you would want to run it if you had it. Like I would run 1 less Grizzled Scout, for example, and I would just add the Volley for sure. But they do have the Send Drill in, so they have 1 board clear. But yeah, I think they're definitely missing the Volley, especially considering Siegecraft is a great card to combo with Volley. Vindicator is not bad. Like, you got some good targets. And with that said, that's it. That sums up the Marcolian Beginner's Guide. I hope that was helpful. If you enjoyed, please make sure you like and subscribe. Although if you've watched this far and you're not subscribed, you're crazy, bruh. You're crazy. So thanks a lot for watching. I'll see y'all in the next guide. Flux signing out. Paragons!